Picture this. You're walking through the bustling streets of ancient Rome in the year 67 AD when a scene stops you in your tracks. Emperor Nero himself strides across the forum, hand in hand with what appears to be his radiant new bride, draped in silk, glittering with jewels. But the crowd's whispers tell a darker truth. That woman beside the most powerful man in the world was once a boy named Sporus. And what Nero did to him remains one of the most chilling acts of psychological and physical abuse in history. Before we dive deeper into this story of survival and suffering, if you love uncovering the hidden truths of the past, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It always amazes me how these ancient stories connect us across time and place. Because what you're about to hear isn't just another tale of Roman decadence. This is a story about how unchecked power can twist love into obsession, grief into madness, and a human life into nothing more than a living doll, crafted to serve one man's darkest fantasies. The name Sporus might not be familiar to you, but his story will haunt you long after you've heard it. To understand how his life was twisted beyond recognition, we have to start with the man who became the architect of this tragedy, Emperor Nero. Nero wasn't born a monster. In fact, when he first came to power at just 16, many believed Rome was entering a golden age. He lowered taxes, poured money into lavish public spectacles, and even performed on stage, delighting crowds who had never seen their ruler so close to them. For a brief moment, he was adored. But absolute power corrodes even the brightest beginnings. By 65 AD, something inside Nero had shattered. Perhaps it was the suffocating paranoia that comes with knowing everyone covets your throne. Perhaps it was the crushing isolation of being the one man in an empire of 60 million who could never be challenged, never be contradicted, never even be told no. Or perhaps it was what happened to the only person he claimed to love more than life itself. Her name was Poppaea Sabina, and she embodied everything Nero thought he wanted. Breathtaking beauty, a sharp intellect that matched his grand visions, and an ambition as boundless as his own hunger for power. Unlike so many women of the imperial court, Poppaea wasn't just ornamental. She was strategic, calculating, a woman who could shape destinies with a word. But when Nero first saw her, he was already bound to Octavia, daughter of the former emperor. That marriage was little more than a cold political contract. Octavia was quiet, dutiful, and invisible in the glare of palace politics. Poppaea was her opposite, radiant, commanding, and born to dominate the spotlight. The affair between Nero and Poppaea began like so many Roman scandals. Whispers in the shadows, stolen moments behind palace walls. But it quickly became something far more dangerous: obsession. Nero wasn't merely drawn to Poppaea's beauty, he was consumed by her. Ancient historians describe his behavior during this period as wild, possessive, and terrifying even to his closest advisors. At public events, he flew into rages if another man so much as let his eyes linger on her. He stationed guards at her side, not for her safety, but to monitor her every glance, every word, every move. He drowned her in gifts that drained the empire's coffers. Shimmering silks from China, rare perfumes from Arabia, dazzling jewels hauled across oceans from India. But the most revealing gift was one he gave himself: control over reality. First came the shocking divorce from Octavia, Rome's beloved princess, a decision that alienated half the empire. Then came the wedding, staged with imperial splendor. It was less a marriage than a declaration to the world. Poppaea was his and his alone, but even marriage could not quench Nero's hunger to possess her completely. He severed her ties to family and friends, surrounding her only with courtiers whose loyalty lay with him. He commissioned countless portraits and sculptures, not for Rome's galleries, but for his private chambers, so that even in her absence, her image would never leave his sight. Ancient writers tell us Nero would spend hours just staring at Poppaea as she moved through her daily routines. This wasn't devotion, it was possession. To Nero, she wasn't a partner, but a living jewel, something exquisite to be owned, controlled, and admired at will. Poppaea understood the dangerous game she was playing. Her beauty and Nero's obsession gave her immense influence, but she was clever enough to know that power built on desire was always precarious. She used her position to strengthen her family's fortunes and weave a network of allies who might protect her if Nero's favor ever cooled. But Poppaea had one fatal flaw. She refused to surrender her independence of spirit. Unlike the terrified courtiers who flattered and obeyed Nero without question, she dared to confront him. She argued over matters of state, mocked his vanity projects, and even laughed at his theatrical performances when they fell flat. And then came the day when defiance turned deadly. The sources disagree on the details. Some claim the quarrel began when Nero returned late from the races, others when Poppaea ridiculed his obsession with the stage, but all accounts end the same way. The argument spiraled until Poppaea accused Nero of caring more for his image than his duties as a husband and father. It was the kind of truth no emperor could bear to hear, and for Nero, it was the moment his love curdled into violence, an act that would scar his legacy forever. At the time, Poppaea was pregnant, carrying what would have been their second child. Perhaps it was the strain of her condition, or simply her refusal to keep enduring Nero's spiraling madness that made her less willing to temper her words. What happened next remains one of the most infamous and contested moments in Roman history. The details vary, but the consensus is grim. In a fit of blind rage, Nero struck his pregnant wife with such violence that he killed her. Some accounts describe a single vicious kick to her abdomen. Others suggest a brutal assault that left her bleeding and broken on the marble floor. Now imagine the silence that followed, the realization settling in on the man who ruled the known world. The emperor who commanded 30 legions, who was hailed as a living god in distant provinces, had just destroyed the one person he loved. His obsession, his possession, lay dying by his own hand. The ancient historians describe what followed as almost pitiful. Nero collapsed beside her, wailing, begging for forgiveness, commanding her to live as though his authority could bend even death. He called for Rome's finest physicians, promising them fortunes if they saved her, threatening torture if they failed, but no power, no wealth, no violence could undo what he had done. Within hours, Poppaea Sabina was dead, along with the unborn child who might have secured Nero's dynasty. The emperor's obsession had destroyed the very thing he most desired, leaving him haunted, broken, and more dangerous than ever. In that moment, something inside Nero shattered. His grief wasn't just sorrow, it was a total break from reality. His mourning became the stuff of legend. He refused to allow Poppaea's body to be cremated according to Roman custom. Instead, he had her embalmed and entombed in a monument more lavish than those of past emperors. He declared her divine, founded a cult in her honor, and spent days speaking to her corpse as though she might answer back. Life at court grew even more perilous. Everyone was forced to participate in Nero's delusion. Courtiers addressed Poppaea in the present tense. At banquets, her favorite seat was left conspicuously empty, as if she might walk in at any moment. And anyone who dared suggest that the emperor should move on quickly found themselves exiled or executed. It was against this backdrop of obsession and madness that a young man named Sporus first came into Nero's gaze, though he could not have known he was stepping into a nightmare. Sporus was likely only 14 or 15, born a slave within the imperial household and freed while still a child. He grew up inside the palace, educated for administrative duties, a privileged position compared to many. Imperial freedmen often lived more comfortably than Rome's poorer citizens. But that privilege came with chains of its own. They owed everything to the emperor's favor, and that dependence made them utterly vulnerable. One imperial whim could raise them to unimaginable influence, or destroy them without warning, with no law to shield them. What drew Nero to Sporus wasn't his wit, his talents, or his service to the court. It was his face. Ancient sources agree the boy bore an uncanny resemblance to Poppaea. His delicate bone structure, the shape of his eyes, details so precise they seemed less like coincidence and more like fate. In a culture where physical likeness was often read as a sign of spiritual kinship, the resemblance must have struck Nero like an omen. The first time he saw Sporus after Poppaea's death, something broke through the fog of grief. Here, before him, was the chance to undo the irreversible. For a moment, Nero may have truly believed he was looking at Poppaea reborn. But there was one obstacle. Sporus was male. For most men, that fact would have been the end of the fantasy. For Nero, the man who styled himself a god, who had ordered courtiers to treat his dead wife as if she were still alive, it was merely a technicality. What followed was one of the most calculated acts of cruelty in recorded history. Nero did not merely dress Sporus in women's clothing. He ordered Rome's finest physicians to make the transformation permanent. The surgery was brutal, invasive, and irreversible. Many did not survive it. Death from blood loss or infection was common. Those who lived bore scars both physical and psychological. For Sporus, it meant the annihilation of his identity. He would never father children. He would never know a normal relationship. He would never even be considered fully male again. In Nero's twisted mind, he was not destroying a young man's life. He was resurrecting the woman he had lost. But for Sporus, the price of becoming Poppaea's replacement was the destruction of everything he might have become. The surgery took place deep within the imperial palace, in chambers prepared for the sole purpose of remaking Sporus. Ancient Roman medicine was primitive at best, scalpels of bronze and iron, crude cauterization, and little more than wine or herbs to dull the agony. The procedure would have lasted for hours, Sporus restrained by guards while physicians carried out Nero's command. His screams, echoing through marble corridors, meant nothing. Survival itself was uncertain. Death from blood loss or infection was almost expected, but Sporus survived, and when his body finally healed after weeks, perhaps months of agonizing recovery, Nero unveiled his plan. He would marry the boy in a full imperial ceremony. The announcement stunned even Rome's most jaded elites. Sporus was stripped of his name and given a new one, Sabina, the name of the dead empress. From that moment forward, he was not merely a consort, he was a replacement. The transformation was absolute. Sporus was moved into special quarters where every detail of his new identity was curated. Imperial seamstresses stitched gowns tailored to disguise what remained of his masculinity and to flatter his altered frame. Master jewelers crafted ornaments designed not for him, but for the memory of Poppaea. Some pieces repurposed from the treasures she herself had once worn. These were not adornments. They were shackles. Each gown, each jewel, each carefully rehearsed gesture was a tether binding Sporus to the ghost of a woman whose place he had been forced to occupy. Every detail of Sporus's existence became a physical reminder of the woman he was being forced to replace. Cosmetic artists drilled him in the techniques of Roman aristocratic beauty. They taught him to rim his eyes with kohl to make them appear larger, to dab rouge on his cheeks for an artificial bloom, to dust powders across his face to soften the sharpness of his natural features. These weren't lessons in self-expression. They were rehearsals in erasure, a daily performance designed to overwrite his identity. Hairdressers subjected him to hours-long sessions, curling, cutting, and arranging his hair into elaborate styles favored by noblewomen. Gold pins, jeweled combs, and ornaments once belonging to Poppaea were woven into the designs. The process was agonizing, requiring heated metal tools and the steady hands of multiple attendants. But the greatest violence was not physical, it was psychological. Tutors drilled him in the behaviors of femininity, how to walk with measured grace, how to sit with folded hands and downcast eyes, how to gesture with delicacy rather than strength. Even his voice was not spared. Coaches worked to retrain his speech, pressing him to adopt higher tones, softer inflections, and the mannerisms of women's conversation. Imagine the torment of that transformation. Each day Sporus was compelled to abandon not just how he looked, but who he was. Step by step, word by word, he was stripped of his self until only a shadow remained, a living doll, molded to satisfy the fantasy of the most dangerous man in the empire. Every day, Sporus was forced to stare into mirrors that no longer showed himself, but a stranger, a carefully constructed illusion wearing his face. Each lesson in posture, speech, and movement reinforced the same brutal truth. His true identity was being dismantled piece by piece. Every jewel that once belonged to Poppaea now weighed on him like a chain, binding him to a role he had never chosen. By the spring of 67 AD, the transformation was complete. Nero scheduled the wedding to coincide with major religious festivals, ensuring the ceremony carried the weight of divine sanction. He spared no expense. The grandest hall of the palace was transformed into a vision of splendor. Garlands of imported flowers draped from marble columns, thousands of oil lamps casting a golden glow across polished floors. Musicians played traditional wedding hymns as servants carried platters of delicacies and poured the finest wines. To the unknowing, it might have seemed like any other imperial marriage, but those in attendance understood the grotesque truth. Before them stood not an empress, but a mutilated teenager, dressed in the silks of a dead woman, forced to speak vows that were not his own. The rituals were carried out with chilling normalcy. Vows exchanged, hands joined, sacred bread broken and shared, legal documents signed. On parchment it was an official marriage. In reality it was a performance, one in which Rome's most powerful men and women had no choice but to play their parts. They smiled, offered gifts, and delivered congratulations, even as the air in the hall must have crackled with suppressed unease. Horror and fascination, dread and obedience, all woven together in one suffocating silence. After the wedding, Nero treated Sporus exactly as he would a legitimate empress. He was given his own household staff, quarters in the palace, a treasury-funded allowance, even a ceremonial litter for processions. To the outside world, it looked like luxury. But for Sporus, every privilege was a prison. His body, his voice, his very soul had been conscripted into service, not as himself, but as a ghost. The erasure of Sporus's identity was now complete. His life became an unending performance of a role designed to crush his spirit. He was expected to accompany Nero everywhere, seated beside him at state banquets, paraded at public ceremonies, presented to dignitaries as the devoted empress. This wasn't mere theater. Nero truly seemed to believe he had resurrected Poppaea. He called Sporus by her name, recalled intimate memories of their marriage, and expected Sporus to respond as though those memories were his own. Every day was a test of survival, a performance where the smallest mistake, a misplaced gesture, a pause too long before answering, could mean death. Sporus was forced to master not only the appearance of femininity, but the illusion of shared history. When Nero reminisced about a moment with Poppaea, Sporus had to react with recognition, as if he himself had lived it. Ancient sources suggest he became eerily skilled at this, developing an almost preternatural ability to anticipate Nero's moods and provide whatever response would soothe the emperor's fragile delusions. But behind this perfect mask, Sporus withered. Writers of the time describe him as increasingly withdrawn, melancholic, and hollowed by the weight of the lie. His mornings began in chambers decorated with relics of Poppaea's memory. His reflection in the mirror was no longer his own, but that of a ghost he was condemned to embody. Every word he spoke, every movement he made was a reminder that he was living someone else's life. For over 2 years, Sporus endured this existence, a doll animated by fear, a prisoner paraded as a queen. And then, Nero's ambitions carried him across the sea. Obsessed with being recognized as a true artist, the emperor announced a grand tour of Greece, determined to compete in the sacred festivals of song and theatre. Naturally, Sporus was at his side, introduced to foreign rulers not as who he was, but as the Empress of Rome. Imagine the bewilderment of Greek nobles, forced to play along as Nero paraded a teenage boy in silks, presented as his empress. Rome's conqueror demanded that everyone honor this living fiction, and for a time, even the world's most sophisticated aristocrats bowed to the lie. But by 68 AD, the illusion collapsed. Nero's excesses had finally broken the patience of the Roman elite. Governors across the empire rose in rebellion. The Praetorian Guard turned against him. The Senate branded the emperor an enemy of the state. When Nero fled Rome with only a handful of supporters, Sporus was among them. Even with death closing in, the emperor refused to abandon the ghost of Poppaea he had recreated. They hid in a villa outside the city, Nero swinging wildly between delusions of rescue and theatrical rehearsals for suicide. At last, when word came that his enemies were at the gates, Nero chose death over capture, his reign ending in blood and chaos. But Nero's death left Sporus in even greater danger. He was too visible, too infamous, a living reminder of the emperor's perversions. To the men scrambling for power, he was both a prize to possess and a liability to control. One by one, Rome's new rulers claimed him. First, Nymphidius Sabinus, then Otho, and finally Vitellius. Each treated him as Nero had, dressing him as a woman, calling him by Poppaea's name, and forcing him to exist as a shadow of the dead empress. And under Vitellius, Sporus's nightmare reached its ultimate conclusion. The new emperor decreed that he would no longer remain hidden in the palace. Instead, he would be displayed in the Colosseum, paraded before thousands in grotesque reenactments of myth, where his humiliation would become public entertainment. For Sporus, it was the final degradation, to be stripped not only of identity, but of dignity itself, offered up as a spectacle to feed the crowd's hunger for cruelty. The new emperor decided to use him for public entertainment in the Colosseum, specifically in a reenactment of mythological scenes involving violence and humiliation. For Sporus, this represented the ultimate degradation, being sexually humiliated in front of thousands for their amusement. Rather than submit to this final humiliation, Sporus made the only choice that was truly his own in years. He took his own life, probably by poison. Sometime in 69 AD, he was probably no more than 20 years old. In death, Sporus finally escaped the grotesque theater that had consumed his life. Sporus's life became a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power and the devastating cost of imperial excess. Yet to the ancient historians who recorded his story, he was less a person than a symbol, a convenient emblem of Nero's decadence. What makes his story truly haunting is not only the cruelty he endured, but the way his very self was erased. From the moment Nero decided he resembled Poppaea, Sporus ceased to exist as an individual and was refashioned into a canvas for the emperor's obsessions. And yet his end reveals something vital. By choosing death over further humiliation, Sporus reclaimed the one thing denied him for years: agency. Beneath the forced femininity, beneath the role imposed upon him, some fragment of his true self survived, strong enough to refuse a final degradation, even at the price of life itself. His suicide was both tragedy and defiance. What lingers as most tragic is how little we know of the boy behind the mask. What were his hopes? His ambitions? What might he have become had history not swallowed him whole? All of it was erased when he was transformed into Nero's living doll, his humanity overwritten by performance until only the emperor's fantasy remained. And yet in that final act, Sporus asserted a truth. He was not just a symbol of Rome's corruption, but a human being who resisted in the only way left to him. His story deserves to be remembered, not as a lurid footnote to Nero's reign, but as a testament to both the depths of human cruelty and the resilience of the human spirit. Across 2,000 years, his life forces us to remember that behind the grandeur of empires lie individual lives, fragile, precious, and too often consumed in silence.